can't believe that Christmas is only just a couple weeks away. But if you don't know who I am, my name is Mark Lee. I'm one of the pastors here at VantagePoint Church. And I want to start out by saying this, that there's something really important about names, isn't there? I mean, that's part of the reason why when you first had your baby, it took you like forever to come up with a name. You remember that? I mean, you got the baby book, you read through the baby book for 10 hours, and then finally you were like, okay, I got it. And she shall be called Hermione. And you mean like the girl from Harry Potter? Do you want our daughter to be a witch? No, I mean, I was thinking about maybe the name Martha. You mean your aunt with the mustache? Well, what about Katrina? You mean like Hurricane Katrina? There's no way we're going to name our daughter that. Probably the most famous story about names is about a lawyer whose parents named him Weird. He thought to himself, who names their child Weird? Like everybody was always like, hey, weirdo. Hey, that's so weird. That idea is so weird. And so he hated that name so much so that he specifically said on his will that he did not want his name inscribed on his tombstone. So after he died, the tombstone simply read, "Here lies an honest lawyer." And people would walk by and go, huh, that's weird. Wow. 700, there's something powerful. There's something really important about names. Because what you're going to find is that 700 years before Jesus was born, there was a prophet named Isaiah who tried to bring comfort and joy to the nation of Judah. We're going to show you a little map right here. The nation of Judah is represented, do we not have the map? Oh, there we go. The nation of Judah is represented in that little brown dot right there. What you're going to find is that the nation of Israel had split into two different kingdoms, the kingdom of the northern kingdom of Israel and then the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, the southern kingdom of Judah had been invaded by both of their northern neighbors, both Israel and Syria. And part of the reason why they had been invaded by both of their northern neighbors is because to the north of them, pushing down on them, was the expanding kingdom. The most powerful kingdom in the world at the time was Assyria, represented by the purple that is now expanding out into the green. So they are now placing all of this pressure. They are coming, they are invading, they are taking. And so Israel and Assyria go down to Judah and they say, you know, the only way that we're going to survive this onslaught is if you and I form one of those coalitions that we saw on Survivor. I've seen it. It works. We need to do that. And as long as we do that, well, then everything's going to be fine. And we'll be able to stand up against big bad Assyria that's coming our way. You know, Assyria, Nineveh, Jonah the whale, Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. All of that is going to come down and destroy all of us. Now, what made all of this such a shock to Judah was the fact that God had made promises. God had made promises that their nation was going to be great. That their children would be like sands on the seashore, that they would be a blessing, that God's kingdom would be established through them. And all of a sudden, they're looking around and they're like, well, we don't necessarily really see that. So did God fail? Was our sin too great for God to forgive? We're looking at the circumstances around us, and are all of these things just too challenging for God? I mean, what is going on here? And so in a famous verse that we usually hear around the Christmas time, Isaiah one day makes a prophecy about the long-awaited, the long-coming Messiah. And he says that the Messiah is coming, and his name shall be. And all of a sudden, everything got quiet. Because they knew that names were important. And whatever he was about to say next would say something about the character and the mission and the true identity of who this Messiah was going to be. And he says this in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. He says this right here. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. And the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be called, would y'all read these four names with me? Here we go. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Last week, Chris talked about the fact that Jesus is our wonderful counselor. Today, I have the privilege of talking about the fact that Jesus is our mighty God. Psalm chapter 19, verses 1 through 2 says this about God, that the heavens are telling the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. That day after day they pour forth speech, and night after night they reveal knowledge. So that, in other words, that every time you look up into the night sky, and every time you see a star or a constellation, or you look into the heavens, here's what you and I have to understand, that they're not there just simply saying, twinkle, twinkle, little star, but they're actually screaming something. That they are yelling something, that they are proclaiming something, that God is great, that God is mighty, that God is powerful, and that God is amazing. Here's a quick picture that I want to show you. It's a picture that I took of the Big Bang. So here's a picture that I didn't take that picture of the Big Bang. Some of you are like, how long ago? I mean, how old is this guy? Picture of the Big Bang, or an artist's best representation of the Big Bang, right? So what you're going to find is that way, way back when God said, let there be light, here's what I want you to think about. When God said, let there be light, then all of a sudden light came streaming out of the mouth of God at 186,000 miles per second. And in case you didn't know, that's the speed of light, just in case you weren't paying attention during your high school physics class. Some of you are like, wow, I mean, can anything go? Can you imagine anything going 186,000 miles per second? Some of you are like, yeah, light. I mean, it's so fast that light can circle around the entire earth 7 times in 1 second. And yet, this is what our mighty God has created. Okay, next picture. Let's go out 93 million miles out from our pale blue dot to something that we like to call the sun. Now, I don't know what God calls it. We like to call it our sun. And here's what you have to understand, that this isn't just obviously a little yellow circle that we like to draw a happy face on. That this thing right here is a raging ball of fire. It is 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface of the sun, which is equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs all going off at the same time, streaming light out at 186,000 miles per second. This light only takes 8 minutes to travel the 93 million mile journey all the way from the sun to the surface of our skin in Eastvale, California. This is what some scientists say. Scientists say that it would take the gross national product of the United States of America 7 million years for Southern California Edison to power the sun for how long? For 1 second. And yet, here's the point that I want to make today, that who is the one that's created all of this? Do you know who it is? It's the baby in the manger. That a lot of times we have a tendency to say, oh, nice, cute baby Jesus. He needs me to burp him and change his diaper, and he seems so cute, and he seems so cuddly, and he seems so manageable. And yet the point that Isaiah wants to get across, and the point that we want to talk about today, is that he may be a baby, but at the same time we have to right size who that baby actually is. That he is not a puny, pathetic, powerless cliche that has the potential to make absolutely no difference in our lives, but that he is actually almighty, all-powerful, creator of the universe. In fact, what does Colossians 1 say? It says he, speaking of Jesus, that he is the image of the invisible God. That he is the firstborn over all creation, that for him all things have been created, both in the heavens on earth, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, that all things have been created by him, and that all things have been created for him. And yet, here's a point that I want to make today, that all throughout the history of the world, that man, you, me, all of mankind, that we have always tried to shrink God. Whoop. Have you ever seen the movie Ant-Man? You know, whoop, you know, everything kind of shrinks. That's what we want to do to God. We want to put a little Ant-Man suit on God. We want to push a button and whoop. We want to just shrink God. You know what I find is one of the most peculiar commands in the Bible? That we should magnify God. That we should magnify God. And that we should magnify his holy name. Why is that so strange? Do you know why? Because we don't magnify big things. We magnify small things. We magnify ants. We magnify cells. We magnify little words on a page. But we don't magnify the Empire State Building or something bigger than that. And yet the Bible calls us to magnify God. And why is that? Because you and I always have this tendency to whoop. We all want to shrink him. We all want to make him cute. We all want to make him manageable. We don't want to see God as a mighty God. You know how we want to see God? We want to see God a little bit more like Santa. You know, with the broad face and a round little belly. That shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. That's how we want to see God. Do you know why we want to see God like that? Because he's a lot more manageable. Because I'm not afraid of him. Because I'm not afraid of being accountable to him. You know why? Because at the end of the day, what's the worst that guy can do to me? Maybe put a lump of coal in my stocking? Honestly, when was the last time he ever did that? Right? There is no God. There is no God. That's what skeptics want to say all the time, right? There is no God. And it's just a figment of your imagination. That he's something that only exists because you want him to exist. To which, do you know what I usually say? I usually say this. That's crazy. Do you know why that's crazy? Because I would not choose to create the kind of God that I believe in. A kind of God who is morally perfect. A kind of God who one day that I will stand accountable to for every careless word that I have ever spoken, every thought that I have ever thought, every dollar that I have ever spent, and that not even a smidgen of sin can exist in his presence. You know how I want to see God? I want to see God a little bit more like the Pillsbury Doughboy. You know, like, push his tummy and he's like, That's the kind of God I want to believe in. And so what do? We have a tendency to shrink God. We want to shrink God. We want to shrink God. Now, like I said, people all throughout history have tried to do that, and you could do that too. God has given you free will to think about whatever you want to think about, do whatever you want to do. However, the only thing that I want to talk about is this. There's some inadvertent consequences if you choose to do that. That if you take the teeth from the lion, then what's going to happen is that certain things, certain other maybe unintended consequences are going to happen, and that is this right here. Here, just something for you to think about. The more you shrink God, the more of what's going to happen is the more you're going to magnify your problems, okay? So the more you shrink God, you can totally do that. You just need to understand that what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up magnifying your problems at the same time. I know what some of you are thinking, because some of you are such good Christians. Just look at you. You're dressed all nice, and and you're thinking to yourself, you know what, Mark? I've been in church all my life. You know, I believe that my God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing that my God can't do. To which I would reply, man, that's so awesome. You must not worry at all then. I believe that my God is so big. He's so amazing. I believe everything that you said. Wow, that's amazing. Because then you must pray a lot then. Because that's what happens when we believe in that kind of God, right? I mean, here's what I want to ask you. If life is like a storm, and God is like an anchor, then let me ask you this. You want a big anchor or you want a small anchor? Like, I want a big one. You know what I'm saying? If life is like an earthquake, and God is like the foundation of your building, do you want a big foundation? Or do you want a small little foundation? Like, I want a big one. I want a really, really, really big foundation. And what you're going to find is that all throughout the scriptures, the Bible compares God to what? A foundation. The Bible compares God to a rock. The Bible compares God to what else? A fortress. The Bible compares God to these strong, these stable things that can anchor our soul, not only in this world, but all throughout eternity. You know what the Bible likes to call that? The Bible likes to call that sovereignty. That you and I need to learn how to rest in God's sovereignty. Now, that's a really, really big word, isn't it? But believe it or not, you actually know what that means. Because what is a sovereign? The sovereign of a nation is somebody who's the ruler over that nation. So when we talk about God's sovereignty, all of a sudden what we're talking about is this, that God is the president of all presidents. That God is the prime minister of all prime ministers. That God is the dictator over all evil Korean dictators, including myself. That you and I seem to forget that as soon as God arches his eyebrow, that there are millions of angels that all of a sudden turn and stand at attention. That every throne is like a footstool to God. Every crown is like paper mache compared to his. That God needs no cabinet. That he has no counsel. That he reports to no one. And that God is the one who is in charge. And here's the point that I want to make today. You ready for it? If God is the one who is in charge, you know what that means? That means you are not. If God is in charge, then we are not in charge. And I understand that's hard because we want to be in control. I don't want to lose control. I don't want to, what the Bible calls surrender. I don't want to surrender. Who wants to put up their hands in surrender? I don't want to do that. I want to gain control. I don't want to lose control. In fact, there was a famous study done in World War II about control. And what they did is they looked at two different types of soldiers during World War II. They looked at infantrymen and they looked at fighter pilots, and they found a vast difference between the two. That when they looked at the foot soldiers, they found that after 60 days of continuous combat, that all of these soldiers felt emotionally drained. And who wouldn't, right? They're not weak. It's just that when you're surrounded by bombs and snipers and machine gun fire, yeah, that's enough to make anybody a little bit jumpy. So that wasn't what surprised them. What actually surprised them was the amount of total calm that the Air Force fighter pilots felt. That they had the same emotional makeup as the foot soldiers. That their mortality rate was just as high, 50% chance of death. And yet what they found is that 93% of fighter pilots absolutely loved what they did, despite the fact that their mortality, their death, was essentially a coin flip. Their conclusion was startling. You know why it was so different? It was simply because the fighter pilot had his hand on a throttle. He felt like he was in control. He felt like his fate was his to determine. Was his fate actually his to determine? No. This is part of the reason why we hate traffic so much, right? I mean, traffic is the ultimate loss of control. Did you know that if you're sitting in a traffic jam, like you are 3 times more likely to suffer from a heart attack? Did you know that? Because the idea is this. I know how to drive. The problem is the idiot next to me doesn't. You know, you could be the best driver in the world, but the problem is all of a sudden one teenager that's texting could all of a sudden be the end of us all. And so the solution seems so incredibly obvious, doesn't it? Well, if a little bit of control is going to bring a lot of calm, well, then what? The solution then is that I need to control everything. And as long as I can control everything, well, then everything will be fine. So I've determined in life that I want to do, I don't know, 4 different things. Every time I ride on an airplane, I'm going to take a parachute with me. Every time I go out to eat, I'm going to bring my own silverware. I'm never going to ever allow my daughter to go out on a date. And all the dads said, amen. And I'm never going to step on a crack because it might break my mother's back. So if I am in control of everything, what's going to happen is that then everything will be fine, right? Is that right? No, that's actually not right. Do you know why? It's because of this principle right here. Would you all agree with this with me? That the biggest control freaks are oftentimes the most stressed out people that you know. Because let's talk about your mother-in-law for a second. Some of you are like, I'm sitting next to my mother-in-law. And I really want to look at her right now. But I cannot. The biggest control freaks are sometimes the most stressed out people that we know. That idea absolutely does not work, right? I mean, here's what God's trying to tell you. Here's a question that God's trying to ask you. Can you run the world? Can you run the world? I mean, that is essentially the question that God asked Job, isn't it? So, Job, by the way, were you there when I laid the foundations of the world? I don't know.